All right, we're in Romans chapter 7 this week. I don't know if we're going to get through the entire chapter during our Bible study, but I'm going to try to give you an overview of the whole chapter. I'm going to have to miss some of the juicy details and wait for us to study those together as we go through it verse by verse. But here's a quick overview of Romans 7. Um, just to set the context again, we've been looking at Romans as the power of God, the gospel, the message that righteousness comes from not within us, but from outside of us, that we are not righteous on our own. And so some of the key chapters we've looked at recently would be who are you counting on for righteousness? Are you counting on yourself? Are you counting on Christ? Chapter 5 was who are you connected to? If you're connected to Adam, he's the first man that leads us in that sinful path. If you're connected to Christ, he's the one that leads us to true righteousness in that union that we have with him through faith. Chapter 6 was who's your master? We're all a slave to something. Uh, Paul had asked where sin increased, grace increased or abounded all the more. So the question was, are we to continue in sin so that grace might look better and abound more? And he says, no, absolutely not. We're dead to our master sin, and now we're alive to Christ, our new master. Christ died for our sins. He rose to life for our justification so that we would, uh, have significance and standing before God. Christ is our new master, leading us to life. And so now, chapter 7 that we're looking at this week is who is competent to live that worthy life following the master? Who can confidently say, I keep the law? Who has mastered sin? That's the question of chapter 7. Honestly, let's be honest with ourselves. I want to do what's right, like the Apostle Paul says in chapter 7 of Romans. But if I'm honest, I keep failing. I can't do the things I want to do and say these are the good things I should be doing. Let's keep it real. We are not as good as we want to be. We're not as good as we sometimes think we are. We're not as good as we pretend to be. We're not as good as other people might say that we are and think that we are as well. Romans 7 asks this question, uh, what is our relation to the law now as Christians? The law that we obviously keep breaking. Well, the law, first of all, shows us our flaws. We've seen that before in chapter 3. The law reveals our sin. The law of God, though it shows us our sin, it's binding over us. We can't run away from it. We can't escape it. God's law is binding. Even if we don't believe in the Bible or God's laws from the scriptures, we have our own laws that we hold ourselves accountable to, and we hold especially other people accountable to the laws that we have. And that's simply a reflection of God's law in our hearts. Our law is a reflection of his law. We're all bound to the law. We're married to it, Paul says. And he uses this illustration of marriage. For better or worse, literally, you're married to the law. That is, as long as you're alive. But Paul says, when you die, the marriage obligation ends. You're free to remarry someone else, right? I mean, my wife would literally kill me with a frying pan if she found out if I was committing adultery. If I was caught cheating on her, the law would literally kill me through her administration of the law. But my wife also freely says, if I ever die, speaking about herself, I want you, Brad, to remarry. She says you're going to need all the help you can get. I agree. I admit it. Here's the honest truth. We die under the law. We don't have what it takes to keep the law fully and still face the very real consequences, even death. We need all the help we can get. In a relationship with Jesus, we die to the law and we have a new way of living and relating to righteousness in the law through his life. Okay, a few years ago, let me give you another illustration outside of marriage. I loaned someone a few $100s to pay off some parking tickets and reinstate their driver's license so they could get a truck driving job. And it worked out well. But before he paid me back any of the money, that binding agreement became no longer binding to him. Do you know how? Because he died. He died before he paid back what he owed. He died to the law of owing me something or anything. When we join Christ by faith, it's like a new marriage. We divorce sin. We literally die to the law as our master because Christ's death has paid for our debt. He's paid what we owed. He's paid what we owed the law of God. Christ paid it off. So our debt died with Christ's payment when he died for our debt. See, so I don't have to pay anymore because I'm no longer alive to that penalty, that payment that I owed God. So now we don't serve under the old letter of the law, Paul says here in Romans 7, right there in verse 6. We don't serve under that old way of obligation to the law, that burden that simply crushes us. When you owe someone money, it's rather shameful. We don't want to look people in the eye when we owe them something. We don't want to even be around them. It's like, we know I owe you money. I know. and it crushes the relationship. It hurts the relationship. Now that we're united to Christ with no debt to God, no penalty hanging over us because he's paid it, no hidden fees or debt collectors breathing down our necks, now we can live fully, freely, doing what is right because we want to. Now here's where it gets a little interesting. We want to do what's right, but Paul says in Romans 7, especially in the second half, I want to do what's right. I desire the right thing to keep the law. But there's a problem. I can't seem to do it. I'm going to be honest. I can't seem to keep the laws that I believe are good and right. I know I have the responsibility to do good, but I don't have the ability to consistently do it. I feel the burden. That desire is within me, but I don't have the power within myself to do what's right deeply, truly, fully, consistently. So the penalty of sin is gone, the debt that I owe God. The power of sin is broken. Sin is not my master. It has no authority over me to chase me down and say, this is what you owe God. But the presence of sin is still in us. And sin works with the law in this manipulative way. Sin takes advantage of the law to defeat us, to discourage us, to depress us, to even try to kill us still. The law reveals our sin to us. We begin to feel ashamed. Then the law provokes even more sin, pouring fuel on the fire of what desires we already have to sin. But there's something really defiant when the law comes in contact with the sinner's heart and mind. The law says to us, don't do that. Thou shalt not, right? And we might say, I wasn't even really thinking about doing that. But now that you mentioned it, now that you brought it up, that sounds kind of fun. Try to stop me. There's this defiance when the law comes into the contact with the sinner. But if we keep our eyes on what Christ has given us graciously, life through nothing more than his sheer kindness and mercy, the free gift of life, that's not a wage that we work for, like Romans 6:23 told us. If we have Christ and the freedom and the love that he gives us, we can honestly face the law and face ourselves as lawbreakers. We can let the law do what it does best, show us the standard, the holiness of God, show us where we fall short of that standard, and then point us back to Christ, who kept the law for us, who paid our debt for us, who will empower us to serve him in freedom and love, and we will learn to keep the law more and more without counting on the law as our righteousness, because Christ is our righteousness. Okay? I look forward to discussing this with you tomorrow night. See you then.